Jeremy Clarkson's farm made £144 in its first year. The papers called it a joke. The council wanted him gone, but that same muddy field now sits at the centre of a £12 million empire. A farm, a shop, a brewery, a pub. That's how £144 became 12 million. Let's go back to where this really began, because the story people remember isn't quite the one that happened. The world's banks are on fire. The FTSE is in freefall, and every sensible investor in Britain is either selling everything or hiding under a mattress, waiting for the ground to stop moving. And in the middle of that chaos, a television presenter best known for driving very fast cars into things quietly signs the paperwork on 1,000 acres of Oxfordshire farmland. No press conference, no grand plan, just a purchase, a set of keys and a farm nobody outside the county had ever heard of, sitting quietly under a grey Cotswold sky as if nothing significant had happened at all. At the time, it looked less like a business decision and more like a midlife crisis with a postcode. Here was a man who'd made his fortune shouting at hatchbacks, and now he owned 400 acres of heavy clay soil in one of the wettest, most unforgiving corners of England. The farming community, understandably, rolled its eyes. This wasn't a farmer buying land. This was a celebrity playing dress-up, and everyone from the local pub to the national press assumed the Wellington boots would be back in the cupboard. And then came the number that made the whole country snort into their tea. Year 1. Total profit. Not a typo. £144 from a £6 million farm. A man who'd made millions talking about Lamborghinis had just earned less than a decent round of drinks at his own local. The tabloids had a field day. The farming press, not unreasonably, treated it as confirmation of everything they'd already suspected, that this was a man who understood engines but not soil, who understood cameras but not weather, and who would be gone the moment the novelty wore off and the first proper winter arrived. But here's what the doubters missed, and it's worth sitting with this for a moment, because it's the whole story in miniature. Clarkson hadn't just bought a farm, he'd bought land. And in Britain, farmland isn't simply soil you grow things in. It's one of the oldest, quietest wealth preservation tools this country has ever produced, understood for generations by families who never once needed to explain it out loud. Agricultural property? Relief can allow farmland to pass down through a family free of inheritance tax, a fact that generations of old money have understood instinctively, tucked away in the same drawer as the will and the deeds. Made at the exact moment the rest of the country was panicking, is now conservatively valued at around £12.5 million in land alone, before the television show, before the shop, before a single pint of Hawkstone had been poured. The land itself had quietly become a serious asset, appreciating in the background, patiently, while everyone else was busy laughing at the vegetables. Then the council got involved, and if you wanted a masterclass in how not to stop something, delivered it in full, year after year, refusal after refusal, planning applications rejected, a car park thrown out, a restaurant shut down entirely, mid-service, cameras rolling, every single obstacle designed, presumably, to slow the whole enterprise to a respectable, manageable crawl. Instead, each refusal became a scene. Each inspection became tension. Each argument with a council official, tie askew, clipboard in hand, became another reason for viewers at home to lean forward and mutter something rude about bureaucracy under their breath. The council thought it was regulating a farm. What it had actually done was hand a television producer free drama, delivered on schedule, week after week, for years. Every obstacle they placed in front of him made Diddley Squat more famous, not less. And somewhere along the way, the council itself became one of the show's most reliable supporting characters. And then there was the small matter of the BBC. Clarkson was sacked from Top Gear after the infamous incident with a producer and a cold steak, a moment that, at the time, looked like the end of a career, not the beginning of one. The headlines were brutal, the future uncertain, and most men in that position would have taken the payout, kept a low profile, and let the whole story fade quietly into the background of British television history. Instead, in the space that sacking left behind, he built something nobody, least of all the BBC, saw coming. A farm tied to millions in land value, a shop turning over serious money, a brewery valued in the tens of millions, a pub employing dozens of people, and a television series that, almost by accident, made ordinary people across the country understand farming for the first time in their lives. One disastrous harvest at a time. So when the critics called it a publicity stunt, they weren't entirely wrong about the mechanics. Everything Clarkson touched did, indeed, become content, practically overnight. What they failed to grasp was that the content was the business. The farm barely made money on its own. The story of the farm made all the money in the world, and it did so precisely because nobody thought it would. If the farm was the origin story, Hawkstone is the proof. This is where skepticism turned, slowly and then all at once, into something the drinks industry had to take seriously, whether it wanted to or not. When word first got out that Clarkson was launching a beer, the reaction from the brewing trade was almost bored. Another celebrity name slapped on a bottle, another famous face doing the talking, while some anonymous contract brewer did the actual work behind the scenes. Out of sight, out of mind. It's a formula the industry had seen 100 times before, and it usually ends the same way. A flurry of initial sales driven by curiosity, a slow fade as the novelty wears thin, and a bottle gathering dust on a supermarket shelf within 18 months, quietly discontinued without anyone much noticing. Hawkstone didn't play by that script. Clarkson used barley grown on his own farm and on the farms of his neighbours, the same fields viewers had watched being ploughed, flooded, and occasionally set on fire by accident. The story wasn't a sticker on the label, it was the product itself, right down to the grain. When people picked up a bottle of Hawkstone, they weren't just buying a lager, they were buying Cotswold-grown barley, British farming, and a small piece of a story they'd watched unfold on their screens, week after week, series after series, and the numbers back it up in a way that celebrity drinks brands rarely manage. By 2025, Hawkstone had posted sales of over £2 million, very nearly tripling from the year before, a growth curve that would turn heads in any boardroom in the country. It became one of Britain's fastest growing private companies, stocked not in some niche farm shop corner, but in major supermarkets and thousands of pubs up and down the country, from the Cotswolds to Cornwall. The brewery expanded, the staff grew. What started as a punchline in a television show had become a genuine, tax-paying, job-creating business. The kind that gets mentioned in trade publications and industry reports, rather than gossip columns and celebrity roundups. This is worth pausing on, because it tells you something rather important about where British consumers' loyalties actually sit in 2026. Traditional advertising sells you a feeling, dressed up with a jingle and a smiling model who's never seen a farm in her life. Hawkstone sold something closer to a fact, that the barley in your glass came from a field you'd watched being harvested, badly, by a man arguing with his farm manager about the weather in the pouring rain. That authenticity, that traceability, is precisely what the big industrial brewers cannot manufacture no matter how large their marketing budgets are, no matter how many agencies they hire. You cannot Photoshop a supply chain, and you certainly cannot fake 3 years of televised harvests. Which is exactly why the reported £50 million approach from Carlsberg mattered so much, and why turning it down mattered even more. If a brewing giant had swallowed Hawkstone whole, the brand would have risked becoming precisely the thing it was never supposed to be, just another lager, indistinguishable from the shelf next to it, its story quietly absorbed into a corporate portfolio and forgotten within a decade. Strip away the farm, strip away the local supply chain, strip away the story, and Hawkstone loses the one thing money can't buy back once it's gone. The business model is the brand. You cannot separate the two without destroying both, and to his credit, Clarkson appears to understand that better than most executives twice his age. Right, before we get to the pub, and this next part of the story genuinely surprised even Clarkson himself. If you're enjoying this, now's the moment to hit that like button. Drop a comment telling us which part of the Clarkson empire you'd invest in first, and if you haven't already, subscribe and tap the bell so you don't miss the next one. It genuinely helps us keep making these. Right, the pub. Then came the farmer's dog, and on paper, it reads less like a business plan and more like an act of quiet financial self-sabotage, the sort of decision that would give any accountant a nervous twitch. British produce only, no exceptions, no substitutions, whatever the season throws at the supply chain. British beef, British spirits, British everything, even when the imported version would be considerably cheaper and nobody at the table would notice the difference between one and the other. Clarkson himself joked that the whole enterprise was a brilliant way of turning £100 into roughly 94. And on the surface, that joke is closer to the accounting reality than most business owners would ever admit publicly, let alone on camera. But look past the balance sheet for a moment, because the pub was never really about the food margins. It's another stage in the same production, another set piece in a much larger show. It sells British farming to people sitting at a table with a pint in hand, half watching the fire, half listening for a familiar voice. It creates filming locations for the show. It gives visitors who've already bought the honey and the beer another reason to make the drive out to Oxfordshire, another stamp in the passport of the diddly squat experience, another photograph for the family album. And, crucially, it sells Hawkstone at full margin, pint after pint, night after night, quietly recouping whatever the kitchen loses on a good British sirloin. That's the machine, laid bare, gear by gear. The food might lose money. The beer earns it back. The farm shop builds the brand sells the beer supports the pub creates more content, the content brings more visitors, the visitors buy more products. Round and round it goes, each part quietly feeding the next. None of it accidental once you actually stop and trace the wiring. Now the honest question, the one any sensible investor would ask before putting a single pound behind it: can this actually work when the British pub trade has spent the last decade watching thousands of its own close their doors for good, one shuttered high street at a time? Rising costs, changing habits, a generation drinking less than their parents did, energy bills that have crippled kitchens twice its size. The economics of the traditional British pub have been brutal for years, and plenty of far more experienced publicans than Clarkson have gone under trying, honestly and carefully, to make the sums work. The difference here is that the farmer's dog isn't trying to win on the economics that killed every other pub. It's not competing on the price of a pint or the efficiency of the kitchen, and it never claimed to be. It's competing on story, on scarcity, on the simple fact that people will drive an hour out of their way to sit in a pub they've already watched on television, run by people whose faces they already recognise from the sofa at home. That's not a bet every pub can make, and it would be foolish for any ordinary publican to try and copy it wholesale. Most don't have a hit Amazon series generating free advertising every single week, filmed and edited and delivered to millions of homes at no cost to the business. But for this particular pub, in this particular ecosystem, it isn't insanity at all. It's rather shrewd, and arguably one of the cleverest moves in the entire portfolio. And now we come to the part of this story that has nothing to do with balance sheets at all, and it might be the most significant achievement of the entire enterprise, more significant, in its own quiet way, than any of the numbers we've discussed so far. For decades, official campaigns tried to explain British farming to the British public. The thin margins, the unpredictable weather, the punishing costs, the endless bureaucracy, the sheer relentlessness of a job that never quite clocks off, and largely failed to make anyone outside the industry care. Farming remained something most people drove past on the motorway without a second thought, a green blur on the way to somewhere else, a backdrop rather than a subject. Diddly Squat did what years of government leaflets and industry campaigns never managed. It made ordinary people with no connection whatsoever to agriculture, understand why a wet spring can ruin a year's income, why a council planning refusal can cost a family their livelihood, why the price of wheat on a screen in Chicago somehow determines whether a farm in Oxfordshire survives the winter. When Clarkson talks about VAT, about inheritance tax, about the maddening intricacies of planning law, millions of viewers now nod along because they've watched the consequences play out in real time in their own living rooms, week after week, season after season, harvest after ruined harvest. Public support for farmers has visibly shifted in the years since the show first aired, and it's not a subtle shift either. You see it in the conversations people have about food prices at the supermarket till, in the increased sympathy during farmer protests over inheritance tax changes, in the sheer number of people who now know roughly what a break crop is and why it matters. Younger audiences in particular, the very demographic the farming industry has struggled for years to reach through any conventional means, found themselves genuinely invested in a world they'd never once considered. Not through a school trip or a dry documentary, but through a television presenter falling off a quad bike, and somehow against all odds making it compelling television. And the industry itself has taken notice, sometimes grudgingly, sometimes with genuine gratitude. Farming bodies and rural organisations that might once have been wary of a celebrity dabbling in their world have increasingly acknowledged what Clarkson achieved almost by accident, without ever setting out to be anyone's spokesman. He didn't set out to become an advocate, he set out to build a television show. But the byproduct of that show has been a level of public engagement with British agriculture that no campaign, however well funded, however well intentioned, had managed before him. Caleb Cooper, the young farmer whose knowledge and frustration were entirely real, no scriptwriter required, became one of the most recognisable faces in British agriculture almost overnight, giving the whole enterprise something no amount of money can manufacture on demand. Authenticity, worn plainly, in Wellingtons and a flat cap. That, in the end, may be the achievement that outlasts all the others. The land will appreciate, the beer will sell, the pub will find its footing, or it won't. But the shift in how an entire country thinks about the people who grow its food, that's not measured in millions of pounds, and it never will be. That's measured in something closer to understanding. And understanding, once it takes root, has a habit of lasting far longer than any single harvest. So let's go back to that number, £144. A profit so small it became a national joke, proof everyone agreed that this whole venture was doomed from the very first harvest, except it wasn't proof of failure at all. It was the origin story. The potatoes that failed, the wheat that struggled, the restaurant that got shut down, the car park that got refused. Every single disaster became content. Every obstacle made the brand stronger. Every setback pushed the flywheel just a little faster. And the most ridiculous part of all of this, the part that should make every skeptic who ever doubted him wince just slightly, is who actually built it. A television presenter from Doncaster, sacked by the BBC, mocked across the country for making £144 in his first year, standing in a field, covered in mud, having no idea how to operate a tractor. And from that exact disaster, from that punchline, Jeremy Clarkson built one of the most quietly powerful rural business machines in modern Britain. A farm nobody believed in didn't just survive. It became the proof of concept an entire industry is now scrambling to understand. The farm that everyone expected to fail became the one thing nobody saw coming, and that quite simply is the impossible, made entirely, undeniably possible. And there you have it, from £144 to a £12 million empire built entirely on mud, stubbornness, and a story nobody thought was worth telling. If this is the sort of British story you can't get enough of, you already know what to do. Like this video, tell us in the comments which part of Clarkson's empire surprised you most, and subscribe with the bell on so the next one lands right in front of you the moment it's out. We've got plenty more of these old money, old England stories coming your way, so stick around for those. Until next time, from all of us here at Britain's Best, take care of yourselves.